From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi, welcome to the show. Boy, we've learned a lot from the news this week, haven't we? For one thing, we've learned that journalism still counts. It sure does. The indictment for manslaughter that was handed down this week against R.J. Vaneco would really pretty much just never have happened if the Sun-Times hadn't doggedly pursued that story. And it's going to be interesting to see how the second phase of Dan Webb's investigation goes. That's the part where they determine if the police department and the state's attorney's office helped cover the story up for many years. And of course, we'll be watching that. Oh, we also learned that even if you're a public official, even if you are a public official, you can't just throw your gun into your garment bag and expect to board a plane at O'Hare. But we're not going to be talking about any of that this week because we are very honored to have a special guest sitting at the table today. Vice President Jesse Ruiz of the Chicago Public Schools is joining us today, along with our old friend Sarah Karp, who writes for Catalyst, of course, has been here before, and she's joining us to help with some of the questioning. Chicago lost about 200,000 residents over the past decade, and depending on whose numbers you believe, somewhere between about 100 and 150,000 kids just disappeared from CPS schools. So for various reasons, about 100,000 empty seats exist in the CPS schools right now today, and some of them are so under-enrolled that 139 of them are about half full or even less. So there's a strong financial incentive to close some of those schools to help close the $1 billion or so budget deficit that Mr. Ruiz and his colleagues are trying to deal with. And that means that we have to ask ourselves some questions. How many schools? Using what criteria? In what neighborhoods? Sarah and Jesse Ruiz, so glad you could be here with us today. Why don't we just start right off with you, Mr. Ruiz, because we're going to be very jealous of every moment that we have with you today.
Well, thank you.
You're more than welcome. You created a commission that we've never heard of before, kind of a school closing commission. What the heck is that? And
Correct. The
what's its
CEO, Barbara Bird Bennett, on I believe it was November, first week in November, first Friday in November, named this 9-member, I believe it is, commission, chaired by Frank Clark, the former chairman and CEO of Commonwealth Edison, lifelong Chicagoan, and knows the city well. And hopefully he will lead that group into a formal study and discussion and listening to communities across the city about how we go about this process. We do have this loss of population of, particularly in the 19 and under group, which is our demographic. That's our P through 12 student body. And so that's when you see that we're about 100,000 students in excess of our capacity. Today we can seat over 500,000, yet we only have about 404,000 students. You can kind of do a correlation and see, well, that's the loss. That's that loss of population from 2000 to 2010. And so we find ourselves with these buildings that are half full and are expensive to run. The average age, I think, of Chicago Public School building is 74 years old. Their 74-year-old structures are expensive to maintain. And we
yes,
do find
we know.
it,
Yeah.
Yes, for structures and people.
Right.
But we find ourselves with a deficit situation, and it's one of the things. It's not going to be the thing that solves it, but it's one of the things we have to address in order to make sure that these very scarce resources that we have are focused on the students that we have today.
I know Sarah's got a bunch of questions, but
Sure.
just to follow up on that a little bit, one of the things that's been said about this is that it's not entirely population loss. A lot of it is just population churn. I mean,
Sure.
people are moving
shifts.
all over the city, so
Exactly.
you have you talk about 100 and whatever it is number of schools that are underutilized, but you also have 80 schools that are overcrowded,
Correct.
right?
Correct. I think the total list that we put forward is about 330 schools that are underutilized, about less than half of those that are more than 50% underutilized, but then there's also 80 schools that are overpopulated and overcrowded. And again, mostly on the north side and northwest sides of the city and southwest sides of the city. And so, yes, you have the two ends of the same problem where you have overcrowding in one segment of the city and then underutilization in other segments of the city. And yes, it's population shifts where jobs have moved. In the neighborhood I grew up on the far south side of the city in the Roseland neighborhood. My parents still live there. Same street for over 50 years. And all the jobs they look at that everybody all the gentlemen in the neighborhood who were working at Sherwin-Williams and General Motors, those jobs are gone. Right. Those jobs are gone. And so if those jobs aren't there, people left the area. And so they've gone to other areas, the industrial parks up north near O'Hare, where the jobs are. So that contributes. I mean, there's a number of factors. And it's good to understand those, but the reality is we have this situation, we have to address it today. Without regard to how we got here, it helps to understand in terms of future planning. And we build schools supposedly for 100 years, and maybe we shouldn't be building 100-year schools. We should build them maybe a little less durable, because we know in 25, 40 years we have to address demographic shifts.
That's fascinating. I mean, that really is.
That is. I mean, we charter schools can at times put up schools for less money, and they have a lower life expectancy. We build very durable schools, and you have to question, should we be building as durable schools? I know the mayor is actually looking at that and questioning, should we put up 100-year buildings? Because, how do we know if the population is going to be there in the 100 years?
I have a question about the commission. One thing that was sort of interesting this week was that at the commission hearing on Monday night, which was all the way out in the Roseland,
right?
Yeah,
5 blocks from where I grew up.
Right over there. And Frank Clark, the chairman, said we're not necessarily going to come up with a list of schools. And then on Tuesday, I asked Barbara Bird Bennett, do you expect a list? And she said yes. So I'm wondering, what, as a board member, do you expect this commission to come up with? Sure.
As a board member, I selfishly want them to give me something that's actionable. And the report is due to the CEO. She named the commission. And it's a difficult task. And I don't envy Frank. And Frank is a dear friend. I serve on ComEd's board. And so I served on boards with him. I served on the Chicago Community Trust Board, where he's still the chair. So I followed Frank around to a number of boards.
You
You
were part of the Exelon creation, weren't you?
No.
I thought I read that.
No.
Okay.
I serve on the ComEd board, but no, that precedes me.
Okay.
So I know Frank well, and I know he's up to the task, but it's an incredibly difficult task, and to be coming up with a list, because that, as we've seen in prior years, since the days of now Secretary Arnie Duncan, when we've done these at times 10 or 13 schools at a time, it's incredibly difficult. There are difficult decisions to make, but it's difficult. It's a decision that hopefully this commission tackles and gives us actionable recommendations. And that would mean, I would think, a list of schools that they've deemed that this is the best combinations. And they're going to be in closures, but consolidations really is what we're going to have to look at. You have 2 half-empty schools. It's probably best to combine them, and where you combine them and how you do it. There's multiple layers to this issue in terms of making sure safety is an optimate concern, and making sure that the quality of the schools, that many of these schools are level 3 schools, which means they're not our higher performing schools. Well, we should, if nothing else, get something out of this, and which means hopefully getting better quality schools. And so I would like to see that if a community loses a building, that they gain something as well, and hopefully better options for their children.
Now, I read something in Catalyst just yesterday, and I'm going to really butcher this, so help me out here, Sarah. But essentially, one of the issues is the sort of the number around which you peg the term underutilized,
Sure.
right? I mean, you have a contract with CPS that says that what?
Well, it says that there should be 28 kids per classroom in K through 2, and then 31 kids, I think, in 3rd through 8. 3rd and above, right? And so, so then they went and they did their utilization numbers off of that. They averaged 30, and so it's like 30 kids per classroom. Now, a lot of people will say that that's too many kids per classroom, and probably a lot of people, even CPS people would agree with that. But truthfully, I think it's all that the district can afford. So
that is another concern that we just went through a new contract negotiation with the Chicago Teachers Union. Frankly, our labor costs increased, and so, and I don't begrudge teachers their salaries. I think they, frankly, are undercompensated in our society at large. It's a very important profession in our society. I don't think we value it enough. But yet the realities are we're facing $1 billion budget deficit, and it's probably one of our largest single expense items is salaries.
But I guess I'm coming to basically sort of 2 questions that are kind of unrelated. One is that depending on how you pull this number, if you were to define a school as underutilized, if its maximum number was the number that is considered an overcrowded classroom, then the number of underutilized schools would come down. It's
sure,
not
sure.
So
there could be some debate. I'm sure somebody will question it, but it's been put forward. It's on our website. Folks can look at the formula of how we calculate utilization rates.
So I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is it is not an absolute objective number to which everyone would agree. That's
Perhaps not.
CPS's opinion.
Yes,
right.
And we put forward the analysis,
right.
With the formula of how it's done. It's not a secret, and folks can question it, debate it, comment on it, and that's, I'm sure, some of what we'll hear. But in some cases, it's very difficult to argue that there's a school that can easily hold. I was at a school recently that is now a charter school that I was told, it's now the Johnson College Prep Charter School in the 20th Ward, a few weeks ago, and I was told before it was turned over to a charter school, there were 47 kids in a building that was built for like 600. That, at those levels you can't argue, and there's some schools out there that have that level of underutilization.
But let me come back at you with this. From what I understand, and when you look at the maps and everything that you guys have both put out, the number, there's a disproportionate number of these schools in neighborhoods that we would generally regard to as under-resourced neighborhoods,
Sure.
underprivileged neighborhoods.
South side and west side
and it's
of the
exactly
city.
what you were talking about.
Yeah.
It's that demographic horror that we're living through.
Correct.
But a lot of people would say, well, these are the very schools that most need attention in our
Right.
system and in our society. So you almost have an opportunity here. You have a school that might be in decent shape, that's only got half the people you'd like to have in
Right.
it. So how about we put more resources into that school and run a
Exactly.
school with lower class sizes and more attention, and
Exactly,
let's
and that's
get
what
in
we
a
want to
roll
do.
up our sleeves.
But when you're facing $1 billion deficit, you don't have those resources to focus unless, of course, you harness every single efficiency you can. And utilization rates are one of those areas where we can harness some of those efficiencies, combine the money that we're putting in, and we're not even talking capital dollars in terms of our $1 billion deficit, that the capital it will take to maintain these buildings. I think I'd heard a projection the next year is something like $4 billion. So if we can put that capital into one single building where there are 3 underutilized buildings and really focus the resources and give them smaller class sizes, give them other wraparound services. I think I heard Karen Lewis speak at the University of Illinois at Chicago on Wednesday and mentioned some of these things, and I totally agree with her. She's absolutely right that given the levels of poverty in our city, we've got to provide more. We've got to provide smaller class sizes and all the services before school and after school to help these students succeed, and we can't do it unless we have the resources.
A lot of the buildings that are underutilized are using their space. I visited 2 buildings, one on the west side, one on the near west side, and one of them had a lot of low incidence special education students, autism classrooms, and so even though they are deemed severely underutilized, most of their classrooms are being used because you can, with these autism students, most of them only have like 5 kids in the room. Then the other one that I went to visit is a huge school in Austin, and an entire floor is being used by the YMCA every single solitary day. Dance classes, music classes, art classes, and I think one of the things that communities are really worried about is that they will lose that space. If and that school probably, if I had to bet, there'll be something that will go on with that school because there's a K through 3rd grade like 2 blocks away and a 6th through 8 like 1 block away, so you could see a consolidation there. But they're really worried that they're going to lose the space for the YMCA, which is the only opportunity for their kids to go to a YMCA in that neighborhood.
And that's fantastic that they have it there on site for their children, and we shouldn't lose those resources. And those are the things that it's going to be the Commission's difficult job, and that's why I hope they really dig into this data, because you can just draw a bright line and say, well, this is underutilized, but it's a lot more art than
complex.
science than
Right.
that. It's a very complex, and looking at the structure and saying, well, this school may be underutilized, but this school over here is in a much better shape, and which one has physical needs and capital needs, and so it's going to take a lot of on-the-ground looking at every single bit. I would expect that some of our CPS staff needs to walk into every single one of those schools.
Because it's so complicated, because you have the kind of the the green eye shades version
Right.
of this school
Sure.
is inefficient and underutilized and blah, blah, blah. And then you have the deeply human side of it of like,
Exactly.
I am really scared out of my wits to have my kid go 5 blocks over there because he's got to go into that viaduct. All that stuff we've all heard a million times.
And you've got to assess it neighborhood by neighborhood and see what resources are there. If there's nothing else in that area and they've got that, well then, not knowing which school or what it is, but I would say that, yeah, you can't risk losing those resources.
So what it comes down to is you can't, the answer to this is not just closing schools.
No.
I mean, it's
a lot more complicated
way more than that.
A lot more
because, I
complicated.
mean, for example, and this is something that I've been trying to figure out. Okay, let's say you got school A here and school B here, and this school is half full and this school is a quarter full, and you say, okay, we're going to drop this school and move this quarter over here. You're still going to have to put more teachers into that school,
Sure.
right?
Sure. Teachers
So
are going to have to follow
you're
some of
probably
the
going to have
students.
to put about the same number of teachers that you had in this school.
And that was one of the discussions during contract negotiations, and that was one of the realities. I'm like, the total number of students, we hope, is not declining.
Right.
It's just we're just trying to put them in one place where we can concentrate resources,
So
particularly wraparound resources.
So, I mean, then that becomes a direct question. Does the number of union teachers actually drop significantly if you close 50 or 60 schools?
It could, but I don't think it's going to be a significant, and that's not one of the drivers here. The driver is the physical plant, the cost of the physical plant. I mean, frankly, would we need fewer engineers and custodians? Probably.
Sure.
Probably, because you're going to have not 681
But
buildings
then,
to maintain anymore.
but then you get into the question of what do you do with that building? I mean, do you just leave it there?
In some
Is this-
cases, we sell them if we can sell them, and that'll help bring in revenue
I
into
bet
the
there's
district.
a big market for used
Not a lot.
schools
Not
in
a
In the
lot.
middle
Roseland,
of
right?
the
In some
poor
areas,
neighborhoods.
communities have requested that they be given that school. We're building a new Jones High School downtown,
Right.
and the community and the aldermen there have requested, look, give us the old Jones. We want to do something else with it. I think we want to have another school there, and if the population can support that, then we'll find other uses.
And it's also kind of sad to think that, we all hope that someday these communities are going to come back
Sure.
and the populations are going to rebuild and you're going to need those schools
Right.
in 15 years or 20 years, we hope. But,
Right.
but they'll be gone.
I mean, I remember, in the 70s, going down Randolph Street and State Street, not the most pleasant
Right, yes,
areas. And
yeah.
you look at it today, areas can change. And hopefully different industries and different things. I look at my old neighborhood of Roseland, and it's not the commercial. I think at one time South Michigan Avenue was second only to State Street in terms of commerce. We had phenomenal commerce there. It's not there anymore, but hopefully one day something else can be there.
One big issue that people are going to bring up until somebody really confronts it head on is the charter issue. There's this figure in the application for the Gates money saying that we're going to put in 60 charter schools over the next 5 years. I've heard some CPS officials say, oh, that was just a promise, it's not really going to happen, but nobody will really, you go to these meetings and everybody says, how are we closing 100 schools and promising to open 60 schools? Aren't we going to just be in the same place in 5 years? And, then, isn't just a zero-sum game?
Well, two things. We're not necessarily closing 100 schools. We don't know yet. It's up to the commission. I'm hoping Frank and company come up with some actionable recommendation. So we don't know what that number is yet. We put out the list of which schools are underutilized. Again, 330 is that the number? Of course not. What the subset of that number is, I don't know. Do we have 100,000 empty seats amongst our 681 buildings today? Yes, we do. And so we'll figure out what the number
Excuse
is.
me, that does include charters, right?
That includes charters.
number.
In fact, there's some charters on that list of
There are some on
underutilized
the
schools,
list,
and
yeah.
they've been debating. I've heard even some comments about the charter operators saying, "Well, this isn't right," and so they're entitled to question it, just like every other community and school can question it. But that said, I mean, the goal is to have high quality options in every single neighborhood of the city, and so we look at charter operators as well as an opportunity and an option to do that and bring some of those high quality options to certain neighborhoods. But we can't, and the mayor and Barbara Bird Bennett have said, if we do this, we know this is disruptive to communities, it's disruptive to the administration at CPS and to all the teachers and administrators in all these schools and our students. So for 5 years, we're done. And so it's going to be a challenge for us, frankly, to bring those high quality options into a district where we've already kind of right-sized things and to address on occasion where we need it, but we're not going to add excess capacity after we just took out excess capacity.
How many kids are in charter schools in CPS?
It's about 40,000. It's about 10% of the
40,000.
Uh-huh.
Now, is it fair to say that the 100,000 empty seats have been created partially because 40,000 kids have been pulled out of traditional schools and put in charters?
It could be a factor. I mean, there's a number of factors. I mean, what the correlation is it a one-to-one correlation? Probably not. Is it a correlation between population loss? Yes. Is it a one-to-one? Not sure. So all these things are factors. but yet the cost to us, and again, we're looking at those charters as well. If they're underutilized, they're on the list. And so they're subject to not having their contracts renewed as well.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, one question I've had, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but when a charter is in a CPS building, what kind of expense does CPS have for that charter? Or does the charter operator take on all the expense with the stipend that he's given?
They take on the expense of operating the building, I believe. If it's capital dollars, I'm not 100% certain, but I believe they take on the expense through a lease of that building.
But they also have their own line of outside
they
funding.
augment, and God bless them that they go out and bring, frankly, additional resources into a public school.
But I mean, I just read that again. I'm not sure about this, but didn't. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. But one of the charter operators got something like $100 million from the state of Illinois. Isn't
correct.
That correct?
Uno got about $98 million to build new schools.
Yeah.
Correct. They went out, got that money independently from the Illinois General Assembly.
But that wasn't operating money, that was construction money.
No, that was construction money, I believe.
But was that, would you say then that was $100 million that could have gone to CPS?
It is all CPS.
They are CPS. I know it's all CPS.
So they're all our students.
Right.
And it's just a matter of some of those students are now enjoying some beautiful new facilities that, I'm glad that they have those. And again, those are some of the schools I was pointing to earlier when I said they build those, frankly, less expensively than we do. And granted, they're not 100-year schools, I'm told.
I think that's a very interesting point, by the way.
Yeah.
But okay, so you're at a community meeting, and I am a member of this community, and I say to you, I had a reasonably good, satisfactory traditional school that my kid was going to. Then you built a charter school. It sucked out half the kids from this school, and now you're telling me my school is underutilized and that it's a bad, underperforming school, and you're going to close it.
Sure.
Well, what's that about? Well, you did this to me.
Well, it was
and
providing
I've heard
more
people
options.
say that.
Sure, it's providing more options, and typically they were put in areas where these were level 3 schools, where some of these charters went into, where we felt they were we ourselves, and frankly, it's CPS's acknowledgement that we're failing to provide this community with a level 1 school, and they deserve it. Every child deserves that opportunity.
This kind of gets right to the heart of this issue of all of you guys who were appointed by Mayor Emanuel when he came in, and there was a broad perception that you were all very much pro, at least charter, some would say privatization, that you want to sell the school system.
I wouldn't put myself in that category.
You want to sell the parts off to...
We're pro-quality schools, and I think we all are, but I speaking for myself, I am neutral on the type of school it is. I'm just providing good options
could you
for
address
students.
this? Can you address this incredible tension that you feel in the air of people saying, yeah, well, if you had just put some money into this traditional school, you wouldn't have to be putting these charters in.
And then you have to contend with the folks who are saying you keep throwing good money after bad, that you do this and the results just aren't produced. And then you provide some of those funds to some operators. Noble Street, very good operator in the city, and they're getting the results that, frankly, we weren't able to figure out ourselves. And so I think we owe it to those students to look at every option and every type of school, be it an international baccalaureate, where we're bringing more of those programs into the city this year and next, to magnets, to selective enrollment, that's what we've been trying to do. And we need to continue to do that. However, and we don't have a minute to waste. We've got to get these results ASAP. Students only get to 3rd grade, and then pretty much a lot of experts in the field, and I'm not one of them. I'm a corporate lawyer by day. I've learned a few things by serving on school boards for the last 8 years. But most experts would agree that your educational trajectory is pretty much set by 3rd grade. So if we miss a year or two in only could be only 5 years of schooling in a child's life, that's critical. We can't miss those opportunities.
I'm wondering whether one of the plans is to, because you don't want to open up new schools, to sort of give some of the existing buildings over to let's say a Noble Street, like Marshall High School - Noble Street, or something like that.
That could be one of the things the commission has to look at, is seeing that's when we talk about adding new schools, that could be an option. If we're saying, given what we have today, given who we have out there and the teams that have been, how many years that maybe some of these schools have been at a level 3 status, that we just can't wait, and somebody else who we feel has maybe a slightly better proven track record of doing that. Again, some of it will be taking some buildings offline so that we don't have the expense of the buildings.
You said slightly better, and that raises the question that has been in the media a lot, that when you look at the performance of charter schools versus traditional. I call them traditional schools because I don't know what else to call them. But if you compare sort of apples to apples, they're really not terribly better or terribly worse. They're kind of the same.
In aggregate, but some, Noble is one that I would give them a pat on back and say they've done generally pretty well.
And same is true for your traditional schools. Many of them do very, very, very well.
The selective enrollments do incredibly well, but they have selective enrollment. And there's some great traditional neighborhood schools who do very well. And there's some principals out there, frankly, who are making magic every day with the resources they have and the results that they're getting for their students.
Don Moore, who recently passed away, did that study that showed that the best operating schools of all were the ones that had the strongest local governance, that had strong local school councils. But you guys seem to be kind of moving away from that.
Well, not moving away, but just having more cooperation in some cases. And again, there's some very good local school councils, some that with a little more training and guidance that we think, just same thing with school boards across the state of Illinois. We've got over 800 school boards across, some perform better than others.
I wanted to ask about the $1 billion deficit, because that's something that comes up often in discussing this issue. Isn't most of that deficit due to pension issues, and really has, the urgency that, by saying there's a $1 billion deficit is sort of, it's not really terribly true, because it's really, the deficit's going to be solved by many other things and very little by this issue.
It's not like you have to pull $1 billion out of your budget.
It doesn't exist to pull it out. I mean, we only have a $5 billion budget. Imagine if we cut 20% of it. It's just not doable. Not without, frankly, imparting a great deal of harm to our students and the entire school community. So without, and especially in a scenario where we frankly need more supports for many of our students. So yes, largely due to the pension issue, but those are our obligations until maybe there's some reform in Springfield that lessens that burden. And federal supports that had helped us in the last several years, that this year they're gone and expired. So the federal government, frankly, had bailed us out over the last few years, and some of the economic incentive programs that the president had passed, allowing us not to lay off teachers and allowing a number of things. That's across the board and across the entire state, and districts all across the state are feeling that. So, without having to go to the taxpayers every year and seek more revenue, we've got to be able to run the system with what we've got.
We are just about out of time. I'm going to be greedy here and take this last one question, because what I've wanted to ask you all along was, were you as shocked as I was when you saw the unanimity of the teachers and the parents standing behind them?
No. Not that shocked.
You expected to see it?
I expected maybe not necessarily the level to which they got to in terms of the percentages, but
the 75.
I mean, we need our communities to support our teachers. We need parents and teachers to support their teachers, demand that they have the best quality teachers in front of their students every day. So a good school needs that, frankly. And so to some regards, it was a challenge, but in some regards, I was very glad to see it.
Well, okay, I'll say it. I was shocked. I didn't expect to see it. Anyway, we are flat out of time. Sarah, thank you so much for coming by and helping. Jesse Ruiz, Vice President of the Chicago Public Schools, this has been a very refreshing interview and discussion, and I hope you'll come back again sometime, because there's so much to talk about, and it's just great to have somebody who kind of talks straight and
we try. We try. Thanks.
Thank you so much to these guys. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You know all that, and you know that you can find us right here on cable, and you can also check this address that you see right here. See that? You can watch this show any old time you want, or you can check us out online, free, iTunes. You can get a video or an audio podcast. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week on Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. Bye.